Before we call this house to order, quickly introduce the teams in the round. In opening government, we have the team from Canada. In opening opposition, we have the team from Canada. In closing government, we have the team from Canada. And in closing opposition, we have another team from Canada. In an effort to, I'm sure, show how friendly the nation of Canada is to foreigners, there is also a Scotsman in the debate. I will be the chair of the panel. I will be joined by Bryce, Kaya, Beaker, and Lindsay. And without any further ado, the final. All right. With that, I call this house to order and call upon the bright and honorable Prime Minister to deliver the first constructive speech of the round for the motion that stands in his name, Hear, Hear.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm extremely proud to propose the resolution before us is that this House would prefer to live in a world of wonder over that of a world explained by science. I do believe in this, and I think you will too. We're going to take things quite literally. We think if there was a button that I could push where science was marginalized and undermined by magic, which suddenly existed, I would push that button on one and only condition. Whatever occurred in this world of magic that existed and wonder is to fruition, we think that all acts will be random. All acts of magic will be entirely outside of human control or conception. We don't care if that means ghosts suddenly exist. We don't care if that means Zeus comes down and randomly does things to us. We think this is a world I would much prefer to live in. So, constructed. I have two lines of analysis. Both of them are directly comparative. First, I want to talk about how individuals are more satisfied, ultimately capable of more in reaching their maximum potential in a world where they don't have control and they are capable of individualizing their own experiences. In that, contrasted to a world of oppression caused by science. Is it a clarification? No. Second of all, I want to talk about the placement of hope, how science absolutely diminishes that. We think there are answers that aren't yet answered by science, and we think it would be even worse if they were. I'm going to talk about death as a result of that. First of all, wonder and unexplained. We think that there's a couple of problems with science that are inherent to it, and we think that it'd be nice if they weren't absolute. First of all, we think oh sure.
Can you harness the powers of magic in your world?
Absolutely not. We think principally our baseline is that of helplessness. Is that we would prefer to not have control over the events of our lives, and necessarily no one has control over our lives as human beings. We think this is actually a problem with science. Two lines of analysis. We define science as like measures of empiricism, things that can be measured. We think science is functionally status quo and where status quo is headed. So, two fields. First of all, science is pursuing a meaning of life relative to how the world works is extremely exclusive in an empirical world where only an elite class have the intellectual capacities and resources able to understand the chemistry, biology, and physics that makes up our physical material. We think this form of exclusivity is really problematic because in it insofar it is actually oppressive. There is no alternative to empiricism. It is factually accurate insofar as it absolutely does undermine, in an exclusive sense, other alternatives. We think we see this in regards to being incredibly oppressive when we lose diversity in what we are as human beings. Time and time again, cultures are systematically oppressed by a superior elitist class with more resources and intellectual capacities. We think as a result of that, what you lose is diversity in the human condition. We lose perspectives and abilities to engage with the world, which is necessarily restricted, no matter how you spin it. We think a world where anyone is capable to grasp their understanding is a better one. We think if that is undermined, and you actually can be, like, whatever you conceptualize can genuinely be as effective as anything else, because who knows, magic exists, we think individuals are ultimately better off because they aren't intrinsically coerced by external factors to believe what someone else thinks. We stand for equality, we stand for excessiveness. We think that wonder exists insofar as it lets us maximize our experience without some sort of backwoods narrative that says, no, this is how you felt. This is what that means. I'm sorry that you had this experience, but it's not as effectively consistent with what the world is over us. Sure.
Yeah, but we think science engenders an understanding that allows us to understand the world we live in and the people we live with.
Okay, so like I've said, insofar as that is true, that is undermined by the fact that it is incredibly exclusive. Only an elite class necessarily has access to the most intricate understandings of what the world is. In our world, it's entirely different because that's not actually the case. Anything could possibly happen. We think this is amazing. We think you get less oppressive, logistical narratives that are forceful and destructive to the human condition. Inversely, in an individualistic society, we think we are more of human beings because all of our diverse perspectives are equally respected amongst our social circles. If you think something crazy, it's no longer crazy and you are no more valid in your opinions. We think that leads to more inclusive circles. Moving on. Second form of direct weighting mechanisms. Status quo, we don't really know how death works. And already because of the march of empiricism, we get negative results. The fact that we don't know what happens to us after we die scares us because that's not what we're used to, because of empiricism and because of our need to control the world. We think, first of all, that's a problem when you have a mentality that science should solve all. But worst situation is a world where science does solve for death. A world where we know what happens to us after we die, and we know what happens to our friends, our loved ones, and to ourselves. We think the alternative is far more cheery, rather than the one where we literally devolve to self-interested animals, where we have no other greater purpose than self-interest. Back up.
If that is so terrifying, why would you extend that epistemic terror to the entirety of your life as opposed to just the moment you die?
I'm not scared of death, Vivian, because my life isn't ruled by an empiricistic march needing control. We think that fear is pandemic of a world that demands empiricism. When you forego it and surrender to the wonder and splendor that is the world, and you see it not for what it technically is, but what you think it should be, we think that's a far more pleasant world to exist in. Alternatively to this self-interest world where we're really just animals and there's not much we can do because we will inevitably die. Our bodies will inevitably decay to the world and we have no control over that. In our world, that's not necessarily the case. Maybe we do live in a mystical world of whatever you want it to be. We think we understand that death may happen a little bit more on our side of the house. We understand that we have a little bit less control over what happens in our lives, and maybe that's systematically unfair as a whole. But we think the quality of the life is so grossly diminished and what we're capable of as a species, the kinds of actualization that are available to us on our side of the house, we think that makes us infinitesimally powerful when we have no idea the realm of power our lives can muster, where we do not know what lies before us in the heavens and we have uncontrollable power. We think this is a world of glory. We think this is a world where we aren't restricted by the bounds of physics, by the bounds of our decaying bodies, and we have to submit to the will of science. We think this is a world where we can pursue endless infinitesimal power. You tell me that more people will die or that life is intrinsically good. I don't care. I want more. I want more than life. Fuck your life. I want glory!
Thank the Speaker, who is the Prime Minister, for his thoughts on glory, and call upon the bright and honorable Leader of the Opposition to presumably tell us about things that are not glory.
Can everyone hear me? Is this all right? Closer? Is this better? Good.
Yeah.
Closer.
There may not be fairies at the bottom of the garden, but I think the flowers are still beautiful. This is the case line we're going to take on opening opposition today. Before I bring you 3 constructive points, and Rob's going to bring you 1 more as well, I'm going to talk about the process of science of question asking and why that's beautiful. I'm going to talk about why truth is often more beautiful than fiction, and I'm going to talk about the value of the human mind and how it actually lays in the process of science. Rob's going to give you some historical discussion about science and humanity. But before we enter into the opposition case, let's take a look at what Twister says. He tells you that science is elitist, that there are poor people that are, or like uneducated people that are unable to benefit from science the same way the upper crust or the more intelligent are. I say this is wrong, right? I say this is wrong for 2 reasons. So first of all, Josue later in his speech goes on to say that science will only bring us existential terror that we cannot get away from, right? So I question then whether science is bringing existential terror or benefits to the upper crust. But furthermore, I question as to whether this is actually true in the sense that I would rather be a poor person now than in the 16th century, right? Recognize that scientific and technological advancements disseminate throughout society do not only benefit the upper crust. No, thank you. Furthermore, I think that the idea that we live in a universe with no power is actually incredibly terrifying. I find that very, very scary. I'm going to provide a lot of constructive material on that later, but the fact is that when Josue tells you that well, science only benefits the upper crust, then what he's saying is that it's bad to be without that scientific knowledge. So he thinks everyone should not have any scientific knowledge, and everyone should be that illiterate lower crust, at which point you have thrown the baby out with the bathwater entirely, Josue. Furthermore, I think as scientific progress goes on, individuals get more and more scientifically literate. I think it is possible to get advanced understandings, the type of understanding you get in a university, just from simply looking at the internet and other sources of information, right? All right, and I also think that there's no kind of actualization available to you when there is this chaos that Josue talks about. I'm going to talk about this more in my third constructive. But firstly, let's talk about the process of science and question asking. I think it actually creates more mystery, right? Because recognize that when a scientific question gets answered, we get another question following that, right? And there is an endless amount of questions, an endless amount of scientific discovery to go down on this path and to find questions. And questions are more fulfilling when you understand that they can have answers, instead of just being a random explanation, right? So the reason that is because then the process of science itself, if you cannot find answers, no one will engage in it. No one goes down that path wherein you create more mystery. So you're left with initial mysteries, right? So when we answer the question, if we answer the question, another important thing, the process comes to ifs as well, right? So if we answer the question about what happens after death, then there will be more questions following that, right? But in Josue's world, you are stuck with not knowing. There is just one mystery instead of 10,000 and 10,000 that you can figure out entirely and lead to 10,000 more. Vitor.
But as the resolution states, we're talking about a world that is completely explainable by science. So at the end of the day, you're going to run out of questions and everything will become a mathematical equation and it's boring as shit.
Okay, so I don't think this nihilism that Vitor espouses is true though, right? You are never going to be able to catalog every single mystery of the universe, up until you just can't do that, right? There will always be more questions to ask, there will always be more science to be done. I think Vitor is wrong there, right? Okay, I think furthermore it's also empirically false that you don't value question asking and you don't value science. I think as a human being, you are a curious little bastard and you definitely want those answers. Second argument, truth is often more wonderful than fiction. So with Josue's explanations about death, for example, being some afterlife, etc., truth is often more stranger than fiction, right? Recognize there are competing theories about what happens to you in your final moments of death that science wants to explore, what kind of universe you live in, the release of chemicals in your brain which essentially make you trip. Recognize that there are cool things to think about. The truth is often cooler than fiction. Recognize the idea that we are made of stardust that comes from other places in the universe. Recognize that the idea that electricity is atoms bouncing around and around is incredibly, incredibly strange and true, and a lot more wonderful than demons or fairies in the light switches, right? I say that what Josue talks about is the idea that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. When you succeed in deciding that mystery is all you want, and that you don't need more questions, you stop looking, you end up losing out on truth, which is often stranger and more satisfying than fiction. Both because it's an answer, and both because the universe is a lot stranger than we could imagine, right? I think furthermore, you are left totally scared. So recognize that in this world where you have no power and everything is random, there is no continuity. The thing that Josue talks about, where he says, what about crazy people, for example? Well, the reason we find crazy people scary is because there's no pattern to their actions. You as a human being fundamentally need patterns in order to explain and interpret the world, and know that there aren't monsters under the bed, and know that the universe is not out constantly trying to kill you, and your mortality is not threatened at every single moment. You need repeatable, explainable phenomena in your life. No, thank you. Third contention. I want to talk about the value of the human mind. On opening up, we see the human mind as a machine that exists to interpret and catalog the world. The value of the human mind is that it is a machine that is self-aware and can understand things other than itself, can categorize those things, can process those things, can conceive of things outside itself. No other machine can do that. No other machine is self-aware. We think there is value in the universe in making manifest your will. We want to conquer the moon, we want to conquer Mars, we want to conquer the universe. And you don't get that when all you have is mystery. You are left in the dark, you are unexplained. We want to make manifest the will of humanity upon the world. We think there is value in the human mind only insofar as it can actually create action upon things that are external to itself. Otherwise, it is simply another machine. In Josue's world, human beings have no value. They are not meaningfully separate from any other part of nature. You have no human dignity. You have no ability to make manifest your will. So overall, what do we get out of both Josue's speech and mine comparatively? I think Josue's speech leaves you scared and alone in the universe, wondering what's going on. I think that's a lot scarier than finding out that after you have been alive, you will be dead, right? I think overall, we get information from me, we get a good point about the process of science and question asking and how that leads to good things. I think we get good material about truth being stranger than fiction and much more wonderful. And I think I made very clear that the value of the human mind is dependent on the search for answers. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition and invite up the Deputy Prime Minister to reconstruct the case for his side of the House. Here.
Is it Mr. or Madam Speaker? It wasn't paying attention.
What's that?
Hmm?
It can just be Speaker.
All right, but then it sounds like I'm speaking to an electronics. Okay, gender-neutral speaker. The world that we live in is actually quite boring, and I have a lot of evidence to prove to you. One, people spend a lot of time trying to escape from this world in a variety of ways. For example, people spend tons of money buying all the video games available so they can immerse themselves in worlds of wonder and fiction so they can escape the boring, crushing reality of going to school every day or going to work every day and selling their soul to their corporation. They also buy a great cocktail of different drugs in order to have their mind escape from the crushing reality around them, right? I mean, you all went to the social yesterday. We all engaged in mind-altering drugs because actually talking to people in a socially awkward situation isn't that wondrous. We kind of need substances in order to make our world more interesting. We also escape into the world of debate, where we get to pretend that we're actually fantastic speakers and that speech can actually change the world. This is our own world that we choose to live in because the real world can be quite boring and quite scary. Human nature is all about escapism, right? Wouldn't it be wondrous if the world itself didn't need to be escaped because it was already magical, because it already fulfilled our dreams, and that it was already good? What we've heard from first opposition was that scientific advancements are wondrous, they're amazing. Isn't it so cool to see all the chemicals moving, blah, 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 boring, I wasn't paying attention. Recognizing science is inherently elitist and not accessible to everyone, right? I would like to see Zach to deliver that same speech to a village in Africa who didn't have access to school, who didn't have access to all the education and smartness that Zach most surely has. Recognize that wonder doesn't discriminate based on race, gender, intelligence, or class. Magic is pretty communist. It delves upon everyone, no matter what. If you pay attention to fairy tales, even the poor peasants living under the crushing oppression of the kingdom, they were all super happy because magic exists in the world and they can go on adventures all the time. You don't need wealth in a magical world. You don't need to be crushing people in order to be happy. You can just appreciate all the magical and wondrous things happening around you, and we think there is value. I think I would like to live in that world without having to pay $50 for a new video game. They also talked about how scientific advancements are great. How it's much better to live now with all these magical iPhones and microphones than living in the 16th century. We're not going to argue against that. Recognize that even in a magical world, you're going to have some muggles. You're going to need to have some science happening because you do need to heal people. You do need to have some form of technological advancement. We're not saying that science is going to die. We're saying that in case you're super unlucky and roll a 1 on your dice, you're going to get a bolt to your head, maybe, or you're going to get a magical blessing that is going to make your day way more interesting, or you're going to get like a random injection of drugs or whatever. Or maybe your God decides to deliver punishment upon your enemies, and finally to deliver justice in your life. He finally crushes your evil boss that was pissing you off the entire time. We think that these random acts of miracles and magic and wonder do deliver more things than science can possibly provide to us. Back up.
Okay, would you play a video game or escape into other realities in which there was no way to control your destiny? A video game in which you cannot win, in which you cannot lose, in which you press the A button and the B button happens instead.
There's actually a lot of games where that happens, right? You have role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons where you literally don't control anything. There's your friend Dungeon Master that literally decides what's going to happen with your character, and that's completely outside of your control. Most video games have most things that are outside of your control, right? If you play Call of Duty, all the other 12-year-olds who they banged their mom last night, you don't have control over them. Nothing the fun of video games is that you can't control it, right? So our case is about 3 contrasting things, 3 comparatives. First, in the world of wonder, it's individual, it's expressive, versus the constrictive and oppressive reality that we live in this scientific world. And it's a world of constant hope versus a world of fatalism and nihilism. And thirdly, it's a life of YOLO versus a life of controlling nature. I would like to talk about YOLO first, because that's interesting. So first, recognize that when you know that you can't control nature, when you know that you can't control all of the crazy magic happening around you, you start to realize that maybe it's better for you to live your life to your fullest, because you never know if you're going to die tomorrow, or if you're going to get a magical blessing tomorrow, right? If you're a poor peasant, now you have hope in your life that maybe tomorrow that your God will finally start listening to you and give you all the things that you're looking for. And there's value in that. Imagine if all the people lived for today, Mr. Speaker. Imagine if all the people decided to stop thinking about, okay, if I go to school for 8 years and then work for 50 years, then I'm going to have a fantastic retirement by the end of the next century. That is kind of a boring way to live, Mr. Speaker. That is not fulfilling. That is not the life that we want to live. And I'm saying that as a business student who's going to be selling his soul to our corporate office starting this summer. I know I'm sad. Basically, what I'm saying is that in our world of wonder, people will go on more adventures. People will explore nature rather than exploit it, which is the world that we live in, and we think that's harmful. In our life, nature isn't there to work with us. Nature is there to serve us. So we try to create scientific advancements that gives us the best way to extract the minerals, the best way to extract resources, right? So you create this mentality in a world where our meaning in life is to control and to change things into your own pleasure. And that translates into how we deal with other people as well. Because once you're done controlling nature, you start controlling other people, Mr. Speaker. It permeates your thoughts, it permeates the way that you engage with the world around you. If you notice, all of the magical worlds, they're kind of communist. There's not much classism going on because people treat each other better because they appreciate all of the wondrous things in life. So the other point that I would like to talk about is how you get more individualized and expressive experience in that world. Because what is meaningful life except a constant stream of pleasant surprises? And I'm really not talking about a bad surprise, I'm talking about good surprises. Recognize that wonder is accessible to all, right? Unlike wealth or science itself. So for the 99% in the world, now I'm not talking about us, we are pretty well off. I'm talking about the vast majority of people who live in less than $1 a day. They're going to be having a better life because of this, because wonder doesn't discriminate. They're able to go into constant adventures and be able to experience life in a way that is not oppressive. But also recognize that some smaller fields will gain a huge boom. Recognize that arts isn't doing so well right now. In a world of wonder, arts will start to replace science in some ways and be able to deliver more important narratives in life. Because if science can't explain Zeus, maybe you can create a ballad or write a cool story about it, or create myths around it, right? So if you have an arts degree, you would like to live in our world. So for these reasons, we're really proud to propose.
All right. I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech and invite up the DLO to reconstruct for his side. Hear, hear.
So Vitor gets up here and he tells us that life is a series of random pleasant surprises. And he tells us that escapism is a way in which we can escape from a world that we find boring because we think we understand it. And I would tell you the reason people wish to escape from the world that they live in is not because they understand it too fully. In fact, they wish to escape from the world they live in because they don't understand it, because they can't actually conceive of why the things that happen to them. Right? The thing about video games or constructed worlds is that there is an order to things usually. Right? Like we engage in them because we know if I do this thing, I will be rewarded in this way, right? Like I know that at the end of a video game, I will fight the final boss, I will win, and that will fix something or change something in the world, and I can understand the outcome of my actions in this universe. Right? So in that case, the sort of escapism that we try and experience all the time is one in which we wish to explore or explain the world more fully because we don't understand what's going on in the world we live in. We wish to escape to a paradigm that we can actually explain things in because we feel like we can't actually explain things in the world in which we live. And for that reason, I think the escapism and the sort of randomness that Vitor talks about is one that we actually wish to desire, we wish to control, and we wish to harness, right? And all of that material really quite strongly falls into the desire of humans to understand the world in which we live in. Yes, Vitor.
But it's actually the opposite. People play video games like World of Warcraft because they want that random loot at the end that provides this random bonus to them that they can possibly understand.
No, it's that they understand that if they defeat the boss, that a drop will come, and if they do it enough times, that they will get the reward they seek. Right? Like if I just go to university and apply for a job enough times in the real world, there is not any guarantee that I will get the good job that I want. Right? In the World of Warcraft example that Vitor lays out for us, I can explain that eventually this thing will happen to me. That if I keep doing it and I keep following the suggested pattern because I understand how this world works, because it is much simpler than ours, that I will be able to achieve the things I want. Right? No, thank you. So I think in essence, the randomness is what we fear because we can't actually explain it. We don't feel that we're meaningfully in control of our own lives. And fundamentally, as humans, we desire to have control over what goes on in our lives. Right? And then he talks a lot about the sort of oppression that comes along with understanding. And I would tell you that your example of how does understanding the world help a starving African child, I would explain to you that African children want to understand the world they live in just as much as you or I standing here, right? The desire to understand and explain the circumstances in which we live is a pretty fundamental part of the human condition. Right? And I think the ability for individuals to explore that in their own way is an important thing. Right? Even if we know everything that goes on in the world, my ability to understand that is limited to my own possible comprehension. Right? In the same sense that, I know that we understand quantum mechanics in some manner, but I don't personally understand it, and I gain some kind of personal enjoyment through spending hours and hours on Wikipedia trying to broaden my understanding, right? I, as an individual, can never understand the world in its entirety, but what I can do is I can gain an appreciation from the understanding of others. I think part of the beauty of science and the progression towards a world in which we understand is one, I'll take back half in a moment, is one that we see as this beautiful element of human life and our existence as a species. Because we have striven to discover these things, and we can say, look, we as human beings have conquered this, and this is how we've progressed. We've gone from spear wielders in the plains of Africa to all of us sitting here having this conversation, using technology in a way that I don't think could be comprehended, and any kind of imagination on the part of these spear wielding tribesmen in the plains of Africa could ever have dealt with, or could have ever imagined humanity looking like. Yes?
Sir, science explains you as a random collection of atoms that happen to fall into this world for no reason. How does that give you a sense of control and purpose over your life?
So I think the desire and the fact that we understand the possibility that these things can be explained, that maybe they exist outside of the human comprehension, but an explanation to these things, right? And I think the ability to recognize that me as a human being and my presence here can be explained in some way, even if I don't understand it, is a meaningful thing for me to know, right? Because then I don't feel like my existence is completely random. In fact, I feel like my existence has some greater purpose, right? Or that I can explain how I came to be here and I can understand the context in which I live. And because of that, I would much rather live in a world in which I am created of atoms, as opposed to just being dropped into this random place, right? In which I can trace back a lineage as to what brought me to be in this place at this time. Right? I think that kind of narrative is much more empowering than just saying, well, I guess I'll never know, right? I think my ability to explain that, or my knowledge that that can be explained, drives me to answer these questions, gives my life purpose and a desire to understand the world in which I live in, and none of that drive or desire comes in a world in which I just assume that there is no meaning, there is no explanation, and I can never understand what's going on. Yes, Victor?
Would you rather conceive yourself as just a meat popsicle, or as someone who does have a magical soul?
No, I think the fact that maybe I am just a meat popsicle doesn't take away from the beauty of it, right? I am a meat popsicle, but I'm a meat popsicle that came from a collection of atoms in a cloud in the universe like billions of years ago. And I think the progression from me evolving into this meat popsicle today is much more beautiful than just saying that this meat popsicle popped into existence or something. I think the fact that I can say, well, maybe I am just a bag of meat, but I'm a bag of meat that developed from just a cloud of random stuff lying around is beautiful. And I think that's meaningful and one of the most amazing things that I can conceptualize myself as such. And because of that, ladies and gentlemen, I think a world in which we are explained and we understand what it is and the huge forces at play that have brought us to where we are is one that's much more beautiful than we could ever possibly imagine, because I just don't think that you or I, if we went back 2,000 years and explained this to people, they'd be like, my God, I could never have conceived of that. You're insane. This is why we have an explainable God, one that it looks like us, acts like us, because that is the only conception we can have when we don't understand the reality of the world. One that is simple, one that is boring, and one that actually lacks the kind of mystery and wonder that side government so strongly supports. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks to the Deputy Leader of Opposition and for closing out the top half of the round. Now to open up the bottom half, I call upon the Member of Government. Hear, hear.
Explanations are often unsatisfying. As much as Rob seems content to be a meat popsicle, I don't particularly want to be a meat popsicle. I think, in fact, there are better explanations and better ways by which we can find meaning in our lives. And I think when we are not given a firm explanation that we are in fact a popsicle made of meat, and instead we are given mystery, and we seek and find our own meaning for life, and we think that meaning is far more compelling and meaningful to our lives than one that is dictated to us by science. We think that meaning that we derive for ourselves is far better and far greater than anything side government brings us. The question I want to ask today, and the question we're going to bring you on the back half of government today, is what society do we create in a world where there is absolute mystery? In a world where we know nothing, in a world where anything can happen, what becomes of humanity? What do we do with our fellow humans? And what do we find meaning in? That is what I want to bring today. And I think the world where there is mystery, a world where anything can happen, is a far better world. We think on side government, the model that has been brought forth today is the absolute veil of ignorance. It is the ultimate veil of ignorance, and it is the permanent veil of ignorance. We think that this is not just the lottery of birth, this is the lottery of life. We think in a situation where you know absolutely nothing, where tomorrow the world can be entirely different from how it is today. We think in this world there is complete equality. Let me explain why this is the case. Let me explain why we believe this to be true. We think Rawls already kind of justifies it already in the fact that he comes to the conclusions that we should have equality if we don't know how we're born, but I think it becomes far more extreme when we don't know anything about what the future is going to be. So, if we don't know anything, how do we build a world, right? Anyone can die. How do oppressors maintain their oppression if their tools that they're using to oppress are not necessarily going to be there tomorrow? Anyone that attempts to put down others and use the tools that they currently have the entire capability of losing every power they have because a fairy queen decides to come down and take it from them. We think it's entirely plausible in this world of mystery that anyone who attempts to maintain their power and oppress those other people in the world will lose it the next day. So So what becomes of our society, and what do we do under this model? But first I'll take back out.
Science never tried to ascribe meaning to your life and what you should do throughout your life. It tried to explain various facts of the physical world.
Okay.
Its reach doesn't extend that far.
So science doesn't necessarily ascribe meaning, but it ascribes explanation. And I think when we're looking to ask questions like, why are we here? The explanation that government gives us is, we're here because there's a collection of stardust that happened to coalesce into a form that looks kind of like me. We think that's utterly unsatisfying, and we think it gives us an explanation that takes away any of the possibility for greater meaning in our lives. We think that's problematic, and that's what we're pushing for on-site government. I want to continue with my extension, because I think there's a lot to say here. So, how do we have a patriarchy in a world where somebody who is a woman today can turn into a man tomorrow? We think it's entirely plausible and entirely unlikely, entirely possible for this type of thing to happen. We think it's highly unlikely, entirely plausible that many of the things that we argue and debate, and many of the things that we think are so bad in the world, are entirely incapable of happening in this world, right? So when we have absolutely no way of knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, when Charizard can rain fire down on the fields and Zeus can strike lightning bolts, when we have literally anything that is possible, I think the world is one we create is where we stick together, where we come together and we say, hey look, anything can happen, we need to stick together. When the world is a place of craziness, the only anchors of stability are the only other thing we understand. And the only thing we understand is other humans. The only thing we understand is other human beings, right? So we look to each other, we find solace in each other, and we build a society in which we say, hey look, we don't know anything, we need to stick together because the world is a terrifying, wonderful place. And in this world, we think, we come together and we build a great society. I'll take front half.
Correct. Nobody can ever make any long-term plans when the Lord giveth and taketh away so randomly.
Okay, no long-term plans. I'm okay with that, honestly. If that means that together we have love and we have peace because we recognize, I think this is totally valid, right? Like, I don't know why people are gasping that I'm for love and peace. This is not a ridiculous claim, right? We think we're unlikely to have marginalized groups and people that are genuinely lower classes in our society because we recognize that everybody is subject to the whims of the magic and the mystery that is our world. When everybody is subject to those magic and those whims, we come together and we say, hey look, we are humans, we love each other, and we build this world, right? So where do we find meaning in this world, right? When we can't come together and we can't look to science to tell us how the world is, when we can't look to science to explain the way that things are, I think we look together and we come to each other for stories, we come to each other for own explanations, we come to each other and we build our myths together. We tell each other, this is what we believe in, this is what the world is like, and we find our only meaning and our only truth in what we tell each other, right? This is the only source by which we can find any real meaning in the world. This is the only source by which we can find any real truth in the world, because it's literally the only thing we understand. I think it forces humans to come together and be compassionate towards each other. We think it forces humans to come together and realize that in this world of craziness, we are the only thing that matters. We are the thing that is so meaningful. And we think this is a great world. We think this is an amazing world. We think a world where interpersonal relationships and the human-to-human connection is the most important thing, and is the only thing, is the best world, and is a greater world than any world, no matter how crazy this world might be. Because we think that is the most fundamental and the most important thing in everybody's lives. We think a world where people stick to their computers, resort to drugs and all the horrible things that side-opposite government has already talked about today, we think that's not a good world. We think that's not a world where people genuinely love each other, people genuinely come to each other. We think the world we describe is one where people genuinely have respect for each other, where people genuinely come together and have a great time. We think this is a far better world, a world where everything is far better. So, it's a better world. I'm just asserting that over and over again. So, we think that in a world where there's absolute wonder, where there's no certainty and there's no consistency, we think that the oppressors and those who hold power over us have no ability to do so. We think that in this mystery, the only thing that we can do, the only thing that we are capable of doing, the only thing that we can understand doing is coming together to be with our fellow man. And we think this is a world far better than anything that opposition can propose, government can propose. Okay.
Here, here. Thank you to the member of government. We now call upon the member of the opposition to get up and instruct for her side of the house. Here, here.
Madam Speaker, what we stand for on our side of the House is certainty. We stand for science, we stand for progress, On our side of the house, we're going to tell you why our world is better. Before we go to our extension, I have to do a couple points of refutation. Connor says that, first of all, that you need wonder to give meaning to your life. We don't think that's true. We think that you can wonder in something like fractals, even if it's caused by a mathematic formula, that doesn't detract from its beauty and its aesthetic ability to impact you emotionally. We think that the fact that we are products of randomness makes us no less special in the world because it makes us unique. We think that things are greater than the sum of their constituent parts, and just because we can understand those processes doesn't mean that they're no less wondrous for us in this way. Connor also tells you that this allows you to have solidarity, that the only thing that matters is interpersonal relationships. Madam Speaker, we don't think that's true. We think that all you do is you create a world of great tragedy, where at any minute you cannot form interpersonal relationships, because at any minute somebody you love could be taken away from you. This isn't a source of comfort, Madam Speaker. This is a source of great sadness. The only constant in this world is A, chaos, and B, yourself. You are fundamentally alone. You cannot seek compassion and refuge in those relationships that are valuable to you because you cannot construct them in the first place. You cannot depend on us. We don't think that's true. Connor also tells you that in this world there is no oppression. Madam Speaker, nothing about this world changes the fundamental human desire to control other people for their personal profit. I'm going to tell you why in my extension we think that makes things worse, right? We think that it just makes these systems more unstable, but it doesn't preclude the possibility of oppression, and indeed makes it more likely, right? Now on to my extension. We have 2 points of extension today. First, all in the theme of loss of control. Loss of control of your own life to the tyranny of magic and to the tyranny of other people. First point of extension. We think that the implications, if you buy anything that opening government tells you, are quite frightening. If you subscribe to a philosophy of YOLO, that means you cannot have long-term things. You cannot achieve long-term goods, and you resign yourself to your fate of being swallowed up by a dragon the next day, so you may as well live your life to the fullest today. That means you cannot achieve long-term goods. That means you cannot aspire to better myself, because everything that I have might be taken away from me tomorrow. I cannot have civilization in this world because the civilization can rise and fall on entirely arbitrary factors that are out of your control. You cannot have long-term goods in that respect, Madam Speaker. You cannot have control of yourself or your society. No. Second point of extension. We think that the loss of science and the introduction of magic makes you no less likely to fall under the control of other people who would prey on your insecurities and attempt to swindle you into believing something that, like, there's a magic turtle in the sky who controls everything, and he's the one that does this, right? We reject the premise that people will be content to live in the world that Josue and Vitor set up. We think that people ask questions because we are curious people. We're also afraid of the unknown, and so we attempt to acquire control over our own lives. We have a need for explanation, to seek purpose in our lives, like why are we here? Why does everything work the way we do? We have a need to understand why bad things like cancer can sometimes happen to good people, and we seek out explanations for what happens in the world. I don't think that we're going to be content. At one point, Madam Speaker, we lived in such an enchanted world that Vitor, well, not really, there was no magic. But we lived in a world in which we were entirely ignorant of how things worked, Madam Speaker. We lived in the Dark Ages. We lived in an age where occultist religions could tell us how to live our lives and take advantage of our insecurities. Why is that true? We think that if you cannot know the world personally, through rational processes that are accessible to anybody, and recognize that science is, in opposition to what opening government would tell you, we think that it's entirely rational. It's something that everyone can access through the same basic thought processes that everyone can discover. If you cannot personally know the world, and yet there are all these things, these terrible things that are happening around you, we think that you will still attempt to seek explanations for what's going on around you, if only so that you can attempt to plan your life accordingly and make sense of all the tragedy that's surrounding you. But we think this allows you to do is it allows peddlers and swindlers to control your life, to use your fear and insecurity and your need for structure against you, to profit from you and oppress you, to create arbitrary sets of rules, like you fall under the control of the person who is the most charismatic, the person who has the best story as opening government wants you to believe, the person who has the best account for how the world functions and can say to you, I can control your destiny, right? Or like, there's this thing out there that controls your destiny, and here are a set of rules that you must follow in order to do that. We think that's how historically, like, things like institutions, like the Catholic Church, were able to oppress people, because they explained the world, and they attempted to form this hegemonic discourse about how the world functions, right? And so it justifies things like oppression. These churches backed oppressive institutions. The Chinese emperor, for instance, was thought to control the course of nature and control for natural disasters. And so people obeyed him because they needed protection from these disasters. Absolute monarchies were justified on the basis of divine right and stemming from this God that could take everything from you. Madam Speaker, we don't think this is the world we want to live in. Sure, before predicting.
Swindlers exploited people because they could make those long-term benefits to themselves. You just convinced me there's no point to long-term benefits. Why swindle anyone when you could be eaten by a dragon?
Just because you can be eaten by a dragon tomorrow, or you can be eaten by a dragon in 10 years. All your world creates is a sense of randomness. So you don't actually know how long this oppression lasts, but you may as well attempt to profit from the system while you are alive, right? So this doesn't control that sort of desire, Madam Speaker. What we think it does is it still allows for inequality to exist. It still allows you to fall under the control of other people who want to take advantage of you. Science isn't hegemonic. It just gives you the tools to live your life as you want to. It allows you to explain the world around you and to reject the occultist assumptions of other people who attempt to sell you on versions of the way the world works. Madam Speaker, if you believe anything in the control over your destiny, if you believe that people ought to be masters of their own destiny and be the sole masters of their destiny, we think that you ought to vote for our side. We don't think Connor's model solves for oppression. We think it creates it. We're proud to propose it.
Awesome. Thank you to the member of opposition, and I now call upon the Gov Whip to get up and close out the Gov Bench.
In the spirit of this debate in a world of randomness, I've decided to do this summation without any notes. So, I don't really know what's going to happen, but hopefully it will give you an accurate representation of the debate. We're going to have two main areas that clash today. First of all, there are going to be two comparatives of the two worlds that we've had in this debate. First of all, we're going to question the value of, I think, its meaning versus magic, and why we think that scientific meaning is ultimately not as good as a world where you gain deeper meaning, deeper bonding with humans from magic and randomness. And second of all, we're going to look at the difference between consistency and certainty and complete randomness and complete where you don't know what's going to happen the next day. We're going to look at why that builds a better world. 3 points of rebuttal to what comes out of extension. First of all, we hear that humans under this model are not going to be able to make long-term plans about the future. No, we don't get any explanation about why long-term plans are something that gives humans utility, right? We think those long-term plans only give humans utility in a world of science where the world can be explained on a consistent basis any day. We think that just because you don't need long-term plans, we don't think humans get any value or utility simply from being able to plan in the future. We only think they get that utility because that's a necessity under a world that isn't random. We think that point falls for that reason. Second of all, we hear that you can still have meaning from science and you can still see beauty in the wonder of things. Note, we think it's false when she says that all humans can access that science. Firstly, because a lot of science requires a number of years of studying in order to get access to the explanations, which certain humans are deprived of. And B, because under their model, which we prove to you and which they don't refute, where still some humans have unequal access to resources, people can't access that scientific explanation or that scientific belief or that scientific knowledge, right? And so some people are deprived of that explanation. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, note that there's a difference between providing an explanation for something and getting satisfaction from that explanation. I'm be able to explain why I am here as a collection of atoms. That may still leave me feeling dissatisfied, ladies and gentlemen. That still doesn't help me if I'm a poor person in society that doesn't have any resources. Science doesn't offer any meaning to my life in that case, other than, sorry mate, you're just unlucky and you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, she talks to us about oppression and how oppression is more likely under our system. Two responses to this. Firstly, she ignores Connor's analysis about there's no incentive to institutionalize repression at the point when you don't know those institutions are going to be the same like in the future, right? So there's no point you making up certain rules on how to live your life if you could be the person of the recipient of those rules, right? She doesn't deal with that. Second of all, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think it's analogous to like the 1700s or the 1600s, right? Because like for the simple reason that as soon as you come up with a system of laws, and the next day those laws are disproved, right, by the fact that now half the men in the world are now women, and maybe dolphins can talk to you, right, people will start to realize that your rules are nonsense, and that there is no utility in those rules. We think for that reason, op extension falls. First point of clash, ladies and gentlemen, meaning versus magic. We hear from all down the line in opposition that we get like science gives us meaning and science gives us an understanding about ourselves. Note the points that we say in rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we think that meaning is only valuable in a world where you can explain that meaning, in a world with scientific explanation. Meaning is only valuable, right, when you can't understand why there's maybe injustices in the world against you, or why you can't understand, like, why you are here. We think ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, scientific explanation, like, is a prescribed explanation on you by the rules of, like, a certain way of thinking and a certain, like, positive school of thought that may not offer that satisfaction of explanation that you want. We feel if we're talking about happiness and utility here, the opposition give us no reason why humans will actually be happier with their explanation. We buy maybe that in a scientific world they might be like better aware about the world around them and better aware of how they've got to us. Opposition fails to make claims about how that awareness and how that knowledge of why you're here is like fulfills your needs better as a human being, like versus our system where you don't need that and where you just look for like group solidarity for that meaning or connections with other human beings. Secondly, we contest the idea that science can explain everything. Like sometimes people want meanings not just about purely like factual and evidential things, but about why injustices have been like committed against them, right? People may want an explanation of why someone doesn't like them or what will happen to them like in a spirit or what's the right way to treat someone, right? You cannot get like a moral or philosophical or rights-based answer to these questions from science, right? And moreover, in a world which is driven by this this narrow definition of science, where you can only gather meaning from these scientific explanations, you can't come to these meanings, and so we think people cannot have an explanation of how to justly treat people. Yes?
The human mind has an ability to comprehend things and systems outside of itself. This is what makes human beings special and other things not. In your world, we lose that. Humanity is not special. You are not special.
Ladies and gentlemen, we think under our world we have numerous benefits, like the people. Well, first of all, we point out that like not all humans are able to tap into that ability of humanity, right? So it's an exclusive thing for certain people. Second of all, we point out to you that that very consistency and that very like type of scientific explanation does not favour all human beings. Move on to the second argument with consistency versus randomness. This is what we bring you in extension when we say this is essentially the ultimate veil of ignorance. We think what consistency does and what a world which can be consistently explained by science does enables people in a consistent world to institutionalize systems of repression. If you know that the world is not going to drastically change tomorrow than it is today, you have an incentive to like group human beings and exclude human beings on arbitrary grounds like race, like gender, like sexuality that cannot change. At the point at which the individual characteristics that you're imbued with at birth, like your race, like your gender, may not be consistent tomorrow, doesn't have any firmly rooted in scientific explanation, you have no incentive to oppress people, ladies and gentlemen. You have no incentive to have an unequal distribution of resources or an unfair and unjust world, because everyone is ultimately exposed to exactly the same forces, and how you enter that world is not based upon your past life circumstance, your past background. It is purely random, it is purely equal. We think we live on the world with more egalitarianism, we think we live in the world with more meaning. I've never been prouder to propose.
Thank you to the government side and call upon the opposition whip to close out the round in its entirety.
few things to clear up before I start my whip speech. Okay, so Vitor tells us that their world is going to create this YOLO mentality where people are just going to live day by day. That's literally the word you used. So if you buy that world, then you have to understand that it's bad, which is what we presented on your case, because you can't form these long-term goals, right? You can't like plan for things in the future, and we think there are certain good things that have to exist in the long term, like I want to buy a house someday, but I can't buy it today, right? And if I think I'm going to die in the future, that's not something I can plan for. But if you don't buy that this is going to cause a YOLO mentality, and you instead buy closing government's proposition that people are just going to love each other and form communities of love and peace and orgies, then you have to buy that we present you a good case for why it is more likely you're going to get oppressive systems of human relationships, right? Why is that the case? Because in a world where you cannot trust anybody but yourself, love is incredibly scarce. Trust is incredibly scarce. You are ultimately only serving yourself, and you are much more likely to oppress other people to benefit the system to your own self-satisfying goals than to actually give like trust to other people, right? Because who knows when they're going to turn evil or like kick you or whatever. Okay, other things. So about this access to science, actually I'll talk about that later, that's ridiculous. So more about this carpe diem though. If you think you can die at any time, we don't think you're going to have these like meaningful things. Like what really meaningful things can you do in a day anyways, right? I think most likely you're going to have a lot of sex and you're going to like do a lot of drugs and whatever. But here's the problem. The day after you do that, you wake up and you're just like, oh, I'm not dead yet. Oh, but I might die tomorrow. Fuck, I guess I'll do more drugs and have more sex, right? Like you end up in this like circle of like terrible things, or if you really like drugs and sex, then sure, right? But we think that there's more to life sometimes. Okay, whip speech now. Firstly, I cannot believe I'm saying this in a final. Why is causality important? From a psychological perspective, the absence of causality is terrifying. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who once taught at UBC, has identified a psychological and biological inclination to find connections between phenomenon, right? This is the fundamental psychological heuristic that humans have, and it's incredibly essential to the way we navigate the world, right? Everyone will be terrified and truly helpless if there is no causality, if there is no predictability in this world, right? From a life planning perspective, there's nothing you can do. You cannot realize your desires because there's no guarantee or even no possible ascription of probability that they will be realized, right? So how can you make like rational decision calculuses based on that idea, right? I can't plan to go to law school reliably because I can just get pregnant tomorrow, right? And not just the women here can get pregnant, anyone can get pregnant. You can get pregnant, you can get pregnant, we can all get pregnant, and that's terrifying. Okay, so realize that there's nothing you can do to actualize anything that you want, right? You cannot actualize your higher order desires, which we think are important and exist only in the long term. And so they get this really hilarious point about how wonder is excellent because it helps the poor who are systemically oppressed by empiricism. So realize, Madam Speaker, that the worst countries for income mobility and inequality in the world are not countries without science. They are ones where randomness rules, where you cannot rely on institutions to deliver the promises that they said they would deliver. You cannot rely on contracts to be enforced. Go to India, right? Like go to any place in the world where you don't see that you can rely on the government to provide you this thing, because corruption and all of these terrible factors are the ones that dominate instead, right? When randomness rules, what happens is the people who are most already in the status quo of power are more able to screw over other people. Yeah, exactly. So, second question. What happens to human relations? We think this is deeply important. Connor comes up here and tells you that we will all just fall in love because we are scared. To us, like who presents the most charismatic story, or who presents us with the most gold, or drugs and sex, right? And so we don't think that this is good because these power structures are going to be defined by the way in which they manipulate the truth and can screw you over the best to benefit themselves, which is what we established we would happen in a world without order. Bad Hal.
Adam, would you rather maybe randomly be oppressed for a day or be oppressed for every day of your life, all in the future, because oppression and systems like the patriarchy rely on the consistency that scientific explanation provides?
I don't think scientific explanation is the thing that upholds the patriarchy. I think science has actually dismantled much of the patriarchy by showing things that women have the same IQ as men, even higher, and like, it's just different distributions or something, right? Like, you cannot just say that, like, empiricism is the cause of all inequality in the world. This is just a rhetorical flourish. We think there's lots of things that oppress people, and we think that it is much better to have maybe some inequity even on a world than to have everybody screwed all of the time, right? Like, don't fall into that debater trap that just says it is more equal, QED, it is better. There is no benefit to inequity if everybody suffers, if everybody, like, loses out on life, right? Thirdly, what does science actually impose? Don't let government persuade you that science tells you there is no soul. That was an actual thing that they said, right? Science has a limited range with which it tries to make predictions, right? It's talking about the physical world, right? It doesn't have... David says, oh, I'm not going to be satisfied by this explanation that I'm atoms. I just want, like, I want to know what is my meaning of life or something like that. Well, science, you know what science says to you? Fuck you. Look for another meaning, right? That's not my fucking job. Science tries to tell you how to cure cancer, how to survive the next day. And in case under their world, you don't get that, right? You only get chaos. So, for all these reasons, because Catherine and I care about things other than living day to day, because we care about love and we don't want everybody to be oppressed by the forces of randomness and statistics, we are actually quite proud to oppose.
Thank you to all of the debaters in the debate. We will now make a decision.